Minister to present her case.
Thank you. I think thanks very much for selecting this topic. There's a lot of talk about the development of new schools because of demographic pressures, and areas like Kildare, where the continued and sustained growth will be in the forefront, as will places like Meath and Wicklow, Fingal, places around the suburbs of Cork, and so on and so forth. The intention is to identify those pressures and to provide sites and ultimately schools in advance of the need. And obviously that requires a recruitment of staff and all that goes with a school. And while it's not possible to have a secondary school located in every town or village, it will therefore be necessary for students to travel. We have a school transport system, and while each child in theory is entitled to a school place on a school bus if the family have a medical card, those who don't have such a card are described as concessionary passengers, which obviously, Minister, you know that more than any of us, which means they must pay on the bus. The problem is that it's not with the payment, it's with the availability of places. And when places are insufficient, what occurs is Bus Éireann randomly selects who gets a place and who doesn't, so it's a lottery. And often people hear it very late staged. I've talked to yourself over the summer about this, and there's been some progress. I've talked to several families who have had their school concessionary, the transport on a concessionary basis for several years, find themselves now to have that withdrawn for all of their children. Paid their fee in April or May, and then get the money returned in late August, just days before they have to make arrangements and juggle work and all the rest of it. And new pupils, for example, who are also on a concessionary basis, who also need public transport places or school transport places. But you can see the kind of resentment in communities that's created. I'm sure you know it very well. If there's no new money, for example, then growing areas are always going to be the ones that are under most pressure. And if there's a new school development and there's developing new teachers, it's self-evident that there needs to be an additional money factored in to account for this. It's not always true that someone in a family with a medical card is automatically entitled to a place. In my area, it's not unusual to be fighting for school places. Section 29s are par for the course. It's pressure all the way in relation to school places. And essentially, we had 19 youngsters who there was no accommodation for in one particular area. Now, one particular family applied for the secondary school, for example, in Clane, and it was oversubscribed, and there was a list of about 20 on the waiting list. When they applied then to Leixlip and Maynooth and Selbridge, and when they got a school place in Maynooth, they withdrew the Section 29. But because they're not going to the school closest to them, they're considered a concessionary place on the school bus, despite the fact that this family have a medical card. They wouldn't have got into that school because there was no places available. That seems to me to be extremely unfair, because they had no choice in the matter. Children are eligible for transport, as you know, if they reside no less than 4.8 kilometres from the school they're attending, so long as it's the nearest education centre as determined by the Department of Education. That in its own right needs to be dealt with. But we still have 10 pupils of the 19 who don't have school places. It's an impossible one for parents to juggle if they're trying to work as well. This has to be resolved.
Murphy, and can I first say I've actively asked the department to deal with the query in your own area they're dealing with. I suppose I should say first of all that the school transport scheme is a significant operation. It's managed by Bus Éireann, and on behalf of my department, we are moving 117,500 children twice a day all over the country. over 13,000 children with special needs, 5,000 vehicles a day, primary and post-primary, covering over 100 million kilometres. The cost now is in excess of 200 million. When the school transport scheme was put in place originally, it was put in place for eligible children. The requisite distance was 3.2 kilometres for primary school, and as you rightly say, 4.8 kilometres for post-primary, and for special needs. What happened to the system before I took it over was that where there was a space on a bus, if there was a 25-seater bus and 20 eligible children were on that bus, rather than leave the bus go with 5 extra seats, 5 empty seats, we would put concessionaries on that bus. That started at 300 concessionaries. Concessionaries now are almost at 29,000. Even though the scheme was put in place for eligible children and special needs children. I can say to the Deputy, there is no eligible child as far as I know, with the exception of little hiccups in the system. We were here during the summer, my staff and I, until 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock some mornings, trying to get special needs children on buses. For a special needs child, sometimes you need carers, you need guarded clearances. It was a horrendous job to have to do with the staff. What I'm saying is all eligible children that are eligible for school transport are getting school transport, are getting the rural grant. There is no special needs child, as far as I know today, not getting school transport. Our problem is, and you rightly said, is with concessionary children, or the second nearest school. We have done 2 reviews on it. We've done a pay-for-value review, which was undertaken a number of years ago independently, which showed that primary school child €100, post-primary €220, maximum for a family €650. If you were to do that distance in a car, it would be well in excess of €1,500 per year. We have not, since I became Minister, increased the costs to the families. Although the families pay 14 million, the state carries the rest. The problem we face is this, that this comes out of the education budget. It is not a separate budget for school transport. The budget has dramatically increased every year. We're facing into next year a budget of 210, 212 million in order just to keep the scheme afloat. This year alone we had extra concessionaries, extra special needs, extra eligible children. We will have the same next year. We've also done a review of concessionaries where Deeper insisted that buses be taken off the route or the price be increased. I stopped them for doing that 2 years in a row. But we are now facing into a crisis that every year we require more and more money out of the education system. We put £1 extra million into it out of the education department this year. It requires another 4 million to take all concessionaries, which if I had my way I would do, off the scheme and everybody would be cleared. But you would be facing a crisis again next year, where you would have more concessionaries, more eligible children, more special needs children because of extra schools, extra pupils going to school. So, Deputy, we are doing our utmost in a situation where we are carrying nearly 28,000 concessionary children on a scheme that was originally set up for eligible children and special needs children. We are reviewing it. We're looking for extra money. The extra money would take all the concessionaries off and also deal with the second nearest school. We're in negotiations at present in the next budget to see can we get that extra 4 million. And can I say that we are dealing with your particular case in your own constituency there, and we should have an answer for you next week.
Thank you, Minister. I know that there will be some parents that won't thank me for saying this, but I've certainly had parents on to me and said that they would be willing to pay more. Some people are in a position to pay more, others are not. They're maybe only above the margin, the limit of the medical card. But if it's a question of having to leave work, and people have that choice, do I get my children safely to school or I leave work? You can see that there's no choice in the matter. And I'm hearing about parents who are driving behind the bus to bring their children to school, and they can see spaces on it. That may well be there isn't a full uptake on the particular day, but it may well be worth doing a review of that, because if there is spare capacity on that, that would be unconscionable. But if we're going to have schools, and if you're going to have schools that are very large schools in a regional kind of context, as opposed to within kind of village settings, you have to factor in the need to travel to school. And if you're going to have a situation where where families have to, two adults have to go out to work to pay the mortgage, the state has an obligation to provide a school transport service. Where there's an odd person falling through the crack, I can understand that, where there's only one person, but where there's groups of people, that just is very difficult for people to take. I would like you, Minister, to deal with the issue, and I'll send you on the particular details, where somebody is turned down for a particular school because it's oversubscribed. I don't know why they would be then counted as concessionary if they have a medical card. They should be entitled to a place without it being a concessionary place if they have a medical card. They can't get the place in the school nearest to them because there are no places. That would be typical in my area. And what you'll find is, you'll find people, and I mean, where I'm using my area as an example, I know that the same thing will be replicated in other areas, but we're under particular development pressure, and on foot of that, it's going to create new needs because you're not in a static environment.
I suppose very briefly on the issue of buses, that quite often, not quite often, where you see spaces on buses. There is a statistic, and I'm not too sure what the percentage is. I think it's about 9 or 10% of people who pay for the transport but don't take it up. That is very difficult to deal with that. If they pay for it, they may feel they pay for it, but they'll take a chance of driving their kids to school anyway. We've taken legal views on that, and it isn't within our remit to say to whoever they are, you must give us back we'll give you back the money and you give us back the seats. That can't be done. It's a legal binding agreement, so we do have some difficulties with that. Again, what I would say to you is the difficulties we have at present are with concessionaries. When the scheme was put in place, for eligible children, special needs children. In the 3 years that I have been here and dealing with it, I know of no special needs child that did not get school transport. I know of no eligible child who didn't get the rural grant or did not get school transport. I would also say to you that we are reviewing the scheme regarding concessionaries, but again, that means extra money dealing with concessionaries. I would make a point that why are people removed off buses? And very quickly, this is very important. If a bus is a 25-seater bus, there's 20 eligible children on the bus and 5 concessionary children on the bus. If an eligible child or special needs child makes themselves available for the village, town or city, we are legally obliged to put that child on the bus and remove a concessionary. I don't like doing that. And very often it's very painful, it's difficult to do, but we must legally, we're obliged under legislation to put that child on the bus. I have never turned down a meeting with any TD, any mayor, any councillor, any family. I've done my best to facilitate as many people as I can. But again, it is cracking at the seams. We are now up to €209 million with people still not getting some school transport because of concessionaries. I want to end by saying that all special needs children and all eligible children are getting concessionaries. We are looking again at extra finance in this budget. I can't say we'll get it. I've appealed for it and asked for it, and so has Minister McHugh. For an extra €4 million would deal with all of the situation that you have. But hopefully, if you're elected next time around, Deputy Murphy, which you will, I'm sure you will be facing into the same problem, that you will have cleared the school transport system this year. You'll be looking for another 4 or 5 million next year again, particularly for concessionaries.
Right, that concludes. Oh, sorry.